What is Crackalack and Hardwood Knocks listeners? If you're listening to this on the actual podcast while we're doing our Southeast Division preview, um, you're going to notice that Grant is no longer with me because the Wizards blew up everything that we talked about ahead of their 2022 free agency look ahead because they traded for Monte Morris and Will Barton from the Denver Nuggets. So we're going to get into that, and then I'm going to readjust what our look ahead would have been from that. If you're just watching this on YouTube, threw it up live just because to have it out there and just be done with in case it's ruined or whatever. But the trade between the Wizards and the Nuggets, and we'll get into a little bit of the implications for the Nuggets as well, was Monte Morris and Will Barton go to Washington for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Ish Smith, whose contract will be guaranteed, and the Nuggets plan to keep him. I saw a lot of people. Let's focus on this from the Nuggets really quickly. What's interesting about this trade is the new salary cap projections gave them a little bit more wiggle room under the luxury tax. And because of the way that contracts worked, Will Barton had some unlikely incentives for this this coming season. Those were calculated into a lot of the payroll projections when they were trying to account for whether they would be under the tax or the luxury tax apron. Now, they have ducked the tax, is my point, by making this trade. They save it's under $5 million in raw salary, but it's more than $6 million when you're factoring in that Will Barton unlikely guarantee, or about $6 million around there. So they have now ducked the tax heading into the offseason. What they could still do, a lot of people said maybe they'll carve out enough room to use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. That's too difficult. They would have to move some whole scale salaries, maybe Smith and Jeff Green, and I still don't even think that would do the trick, to be honest with you. They can still use the mini MLE, and I wrote about this. Calvin Booth has said he has the go-ahead to use the mini MLE for Denver. I would be a little bit shocked if they still use it now, because this doesn't feel like a team that wants to pay the tax at the moment and is preparing for future seasons in which they have to. That the Wizards were able to help them was a home run to me for Denver. I think if you're going to make this trade, and look, maybe they still use their mini MLE, they can do it. Maybe they use it, plan on ducking the tax or whatever later, yada, yada, yada. They have for now ducked the tax heading into the season. I think that this is a fine trade to make while doing that, because KCP is a fantastic point of attack defender, a real 3-and-D guy, is better off the ball than Will Barton is, better defensively than Will Barton. He's better defensively than even Monte Morris. There's definitely a drop-off from Monte Morris to Ish Smith, but if you have Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. coming back and you believe in Bones Highland, this is just, there's some, cap sheet shuffling here that makes you cringe, because this team is so good when it's at full strength. They should be willing to go as deep into the tax as possible. A guy like Nikola Jokic comes along once in a generation. So I get that element of it, but this isn't a losing trade for them, because KCP is exactly what they need. And they had, not that Monte Morris was redundant, but they have talent to make up for him. Now the focus shifts to, are they going to stay outside the tax, or will they use the mini MLE? Because they could still use shooting, another defender, maybe even a backup big. So the Nuggets remain a team to watch. I don't hate this trade for them, but I do think it speaks a lot about how stingy they're planning on being when it comes to spending on this roster. For the Wizards, love this trade for the most part. I think they're going to miss KCP, who was probably their best perimeter defender last season. That being said, you have other guys who can step up. You had I don't want to say a wing surplus, but Denny Avdia, I think, is probably like one of the 5 most underrated defenders in the NBA right now. Kyle Kuzma has become rock solid there. Monte Morris is going to be fine, and he will give you some point of attack minutes as well. You could probably use another point of attack defender, because you don't want to necessarily use Denny Avdia or Kyle Kuzma there in volume. Does that mean that they're more likely to bring Raul Neto back? Perhaps. Maybe they just go looking at to fill that need they needed shooting and defense, is my point, leading into the offseason. And now I think you can argue you've gotten an upgrade in shooting when you look at Monte Morris's mid-range game, his ability to hit threes, whether he's on or off the ball. Will Barton is a good enough shooter. He's a little awkward off the ball, but I think the Wizards needed more on-ball juice as well, definitely more so than the Nuggets did. I would like to see them give more responsibility to Denny Avdia on ball next season. I really think that he is just sort of this sleeping blue chip prospect. We've already seen it on defense, and I think there's a lot more to plumb there on offense. This doesn't prohibit you from doing that. The other thing I'll mention is Will Barton, his salary. I don't like viewing players like this. If you can use it to facilitate other trades, like, I don't think the Wizards are done. Like, now they still have just all these fungible contracts that can move. in separate trades. Monte Morris gives you a good enough offensive steward now to take some of the pressure off Bradley Beal, who, by the way, Bradley Beal, this is like a very minuscule news item, opted out of his contract. He's going to resign on a 5-year deal with the Wizards. I imagine he'll have a player option at the end of it. Maybe it doesn't, but he's staying in Washington. The speculative nightmare is over, even though all along Bradley Beal just kept saying, I'm coming back to the Wizards. Aside from that, so the Wizards keep a lot of flexibility here, and they probably get a little bit deeper just because Will Barton and Monte Morris are two of the, they're both better than Ish Smith, is my point. I think you can make a case KCP might have been the best player involved in this deal. It's between him or Monte Morris at this point, but you got two of the top 3 players in this deal. So you are just deeper by extension. What the Wizards have also done now, and look, I think Monte Morris is going to be a fantastic fit for them. I would like to probably see them have a higher end, just floor general type, because Will Barton, Monte Morris, even Denny Avdi at his peak, and look, even Bradley Beal, you view them as these secondary table setters. Not even, look, Bradley Beal's a primary shot creator, playmaker, and he can be the engine of your offense, but you would like someone who's just a better passer than Bradley Beal on your team. I don't necessarily know that the Nuggets, the Wizards have it right now. It could be Monte Morris, and you have enough secondary playmaking now between even Barton, just with the ball in his hand, secondary creation at least, Monte Morris. And again, if you're going to explore just some more Kenny Avdia stuff, you have enough to sort of work within those confines more than you did before. So I like this trade for them. And KCP was going to be a free agent after next season anyway. And the same can be said of Will Barton, but he's just a little bit more expendable to them. And now this maybe frees up to where, okay, Kyle Kuzma feels like he might be a long-term piece here. He's extension eligible, has a $13 million player option next summer. I imagine he would decline an extension even if the Wizards offer one, which they absolutely should. It's 120% off of his current number. And so you're looking at like a little over $15 million to start. I think he's going to think he can probably get more on an annual basis as an unrestricted free agent, maybe even from Washington. So you're still flexible. I think you've improved the balance of your roster, and now it gets interesting. And this is where we lead into like the meat and potatoes of the Wizards free agency. You can still go out and do just some weird stuff here. This hasn't again hurt you really trade asset wise. KCP was one of your assets, but if you really want to go out and make a bigger deal, Monte Morris, Will Barton. Will Barton has an expiring contract. Monte Morris more so is just an actual player on a really team-friendly contract. Those are assets. Looking at their key free agents, they have Thomas Bryant and Hardwood Neto are the biggest names. And I'm wondering if Hardwood Neto is more likely to be back, just given that you did give up KCP here and he was your best POA defender. They do not have any notable non-guarantees anymore because they traded both KCP and Ish Smith. Their notable extension candidates include Kristaps Porzingis. I already mentioned Kyle Kuzma, Rui Hachimura, and Vernon Carey. I don't think any of those guys are going to get an extension. I could see Kyle Kuzma being offered one and ultimately declining it. Their trade exceptions, they have an Aaron Holiday one worth $4 million and a Montrezl Harrell one worth $5.2 million. They're both going to expire as of now, February 10th, 2023. Their best spending tool, here's where it gets interesting. So with Bradley Beal going to re-sign for max money, and even with taking on this additional money in the trade, they still have some pretty unfettered access to the non-taxpayers mid-level exception, which is $10.3 million to start. Actually, I guess it could be a little higher here because the salary cap projections went up. The point is, after the adjusted salary cap projections, I have them between $17 and $18 million under the tax. So like that's not even the apron. If they want to pay the tax, they can definitely use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception because they're going to be about nearly $25 million under the apron. Again, even after accounting for, not that high. There's going to be like $20 million or whatever is below the apron, even after accounting for Bradley Beal's max salary. That is, I think, really important because not a lot of teams are working with more. There are only a handful of cap space teams, and there are a bunch more teams that are either not going to spend their mid-level exception or they only have the mini MLE, a team like the Nuggets or the Clippers who might have already used it on John Wall. And so this puts you in the driver's seat to at least, I think, be a more attractive destination if you're willing to give the full mid-level to one player. I don't know. Now would be a good time to get into targets for them. I still think they could use some extra shooting. I think you could stand to have some extra wing depth. I know you have Denny Avdia and Kyle Kuzma, but you need sort of that smaller, really feisty wing defender now that KCP is gone. Monte Morris can be fine. He's not a wing. Will Barton is more of a swing man, and he's had some good moments defensively, but he's not KCP, is just my point there. Guys like Daniel House, and these aren't names that I think will command the full mid-level, but just names to keep an eye on. Guys like Daniel House, Amir Coffey, I think is a sneaky good free agent. I would say specifically maybe Caleb Martin, or even either Martin twin, but definitely to fill that KCP role a little bit in smaller volume because they don't have like that natural microwave instinct to their offensive games. They're super accessory, but that can be valuable if you're putting the ball in everyone else's hands or just want some spot different roles. Without KCP, I do wonder if this is a sneaky good Victor Oladipo destination, more secondary passing, and then just the ability of someone else to create his own shot. Will he shoot well enough from beyond the arc? That does seem to come and go, but he gives you some, even now, probably more raw rim pressure than you're going to get from a lot of your other guys. That includes a Will Barton and a Monte Morris, who, by the way, I can't remember if I mentioned this already. Monte Morris is one of the best mid-range shooters in the NBA. So there are now levels to Washington's offense, especially if you believe in how well Kristaps Porzingis played here last year. Another name that would be interesting is I think people believe Tyus Jones is out of the running because they have Monte Morris now. I would probably agree if he was willing just to sign for the non-taxpayers mid-level. That just feels like smart business to have that type of player there. But you could get a little smaller in the backcourt. Are you ever going to play Tyus and Monte Morris and Bradley Beal together? Probably not. I mean, you could. I just don't know how good defensively you would wind up being in those situations, as good as Tyus Jones and Monte Morris can be in their own respective roles. Gary Harris could be an option. Again, smaller, not that long, but very complimentary, feisty on D. Shot well from three last season, and then even shot well on drives, nearly 50%. They could go the Bruce Brown route as well, another smaller guy who could defend up. Who really intrigues me for this team now, and maybe, again, if you don't want to give the mid-level exception to Tyus Jones, maybe you don't want to give half or more of the mid-level exception to this guy, but Gary Payton II feels like he would make a lot of sense. If you believe in his three-point clip, he hit like 36% of his spot-up threes last year. If you believe in that from him, there's a chance that his point of attack defense and just his general defense, where he can defend up to threes, really. And then you can also use him as a cutter, even a screener on offense. Again, you then are investing in some smaller players. With that being said, it just feels like such a good fit now, especially without KCP there. And so that would be another name I think is worth keeping an eye on. You could go, I think you have enough shooting now to where defense is just going to be the bigger need, even though there were stretches last year, long stretches, in which I thought the Wizards overachieved on defense relative to their personnel. And so they could maybe bank on being a league average or better defense again this year by just having the current personnel in place. Implicitly, though, by re-signing Bradley Beal, you are obligated to continue to go for it. And so it's not even a question. Go ahead, use full non-taxpayer mid-level. It's just, how do you want to prioritize it? And so Gary Payton II feels like it might straddle a few interesting lines there. But I do love the idea of a Victor Oladipo in Washington now. I also do wonder how active this team will be in the trade market if you are going to re-sign Bradley Beal. Also, by the way, they could go, like, if we want to talk lower scale options, or not lower scale, but Kyle Anderson, not going to provide a lot of shooting, but gives you passing and then multi-position defense here. Not really a point of attack guy, though, if you're looking for someone to kind of pick up the load from KCP. And I don't know if the non-taxpayer mid-level is enough to get out of Memphis. I think it actually might be, just given what, the emergence of Desmond Bain, Zaire Williams, Jake LaRavia being taken in the draft, and so on and so forth. They could also maybe look at, Derrick Jones Jr., kind of more of like a big or like a 4, but defensively he can play anywhere and he's going to compromise your spacing. But if you're looking to prioritize defense in that regard, I probably wouldn't go the big man route. You have Gafford, you have Kristaps Porzingis. You could bring back, I would imagine, for fairly affordable, if you wanted to, you could bring back Thomas Bryant. Do you want to give Vernon Carey a shot here as well? So I wouldn't go that route. I guess I wouldn't be opposed if you wanted to skew someone who's more of like a 4. But just having the Denny Avdia, Kyle Kuzma set up, like, those feel like really good, like 3-4 options, however you want to classify them there. And I would look for those, like, either pure wings or just the 2-3 guys. Like, again, KCP, who could also defend the point guard spot. And I'm just in love with the idea of Gary Payton II there. Victor Oladipo would certainly be just this bigger swing. With all of that said, I don't think what the Wizards did precluded them from going out and trying to find. TJ Warren's another name, by the way. I could mention him for every team that would make sense in Washington. I don't know how much he's going to cost coming off how much time he's missed, but he's a damn good player as well. And my under the radar ones, by the way, I just want to reiterate, keep an eye on Amir Coffey and Caleb or Cody Martin, wherever those guys land, they were sneaky high impact players this past season. The last thing I'll say on the Wizards is I'm very high on what they've done in the offseason so far, even if you don't agree that they should be bringing back Bradley Beal. To that point, really quickly, if you don't think they should have been bringing back Bradley Beal, you don't make that decision now. You should have moved him when there's actual time on his contract rather than getting into sign and trade scenario. So Bradley Beal wants to be in Washington. Washington wants him. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm totally cool with it. You're still not you still have an obligation, I think, to kind of sniff around the point guard market when looking at trades, just to like get an actual floor general in here. And it definitely needs to be someone different than the John Wall, Russell Westbrook type, even a Spencer Dinwiddie. It needs to be someone who's more natural at playing away from the ball. And even the Wizards were tangentially mentioned to DeJounte Murray. I like that defensively, and he has played without the ball in San Antonio in the past. But you're still looking at someone who works predominantly inside the arc, and to give up the equity it would take to acquire him, I wouldn't love it. And so I like the idea of Monte Morris next to Bradley Beal on offense more than I like DeJounte Murray next to Bradley Beal. Defensively, it's not a contest, obviously. And when you do look at the trade market, the issue becomes, okay, well, like what type of those point guards are available? And the answer is that they're not. And I do think what the Wizards have done, just getting a little bit more expensive expiring salary in Will Barton, is that they could drum up their potential return. But what if they're interested in a Terry Rozier? Should Charlotte be looking to cut payroll? There's like, you've already gone the Spencer Dinwiddie route, so that's not going to be touched with the 10-foot pole. You look at maybe consider signing Dennis Schroeder if he falls through the cracks and is costing you the minimum or like even just a fraction of the mid-level / the biannual, which is the other thing that they could use, by the way. I don't believe they used it this past season, but they have enough room below the apron to where, they didn't use it last season. So they have the biannual as well. That really opens the door for them to like what if TJ Warren is just taking the biannual? Like, what if that's what that guy costs you? What if you're able to get Daniel House there? Like, that's just really good value. And so I'd like to see them do something like that. Maybe do you try and be the team that's like, hey, Ricky Rubio, we know you're not going to play until the middle of the year, but will he take the biannual? Not the best, cleanest fit alongside Bradley Beal, but someone who could really manage the game for you. Don't love it, but if it's cheap enough, why not consider it? I don't view this as a D'Angelo Russell trade destination. If Minnesota goes that route, they would probably want Kuzma in that trade. I'm not giving up Kuzma for D'Angelo Russell. That's just the state of affairs here. I think Kuzma is more of a desired archetype asset to Washington. They could still look at Devontae Graham, maybe, if they're trying to reboot assets. That's someone I imagine doesn't cost you any real asset equity. You're not giving up Monte Morris. You're not giving up Denny Avdia in that deal. You're not giving up, Kristaps makes too much anyway, but you're not giving up a primo asset in there. The most I think you would have to go, and I do think, look, I exist outside the Wizards bubble, so I understand that there are Wizards fans who've seen more games than I have. I'm not that high on Rui Hachimura, but that feels like the highest cost it would take is Rui Hachimura, and I think that actually might be enough to do it, looking at the Washington's cap situation to where it would work. But Rui Hachimura and salary filler, that would be like the highest it feels like you would need to go, because you're trying to reboot Devontae Graham's stock at this point. And he's going to be considered overpaid at 2 years and $23.7 million guaranteed, $2.8 million then partial guarantee in the third year of his deal. So he has close to $30 million guaranteed close to about 25, 26 million guaranteed technically over the next 2 seasons, but you do have control over him if it works out in that third season. My point is, he should be super affordable. Could this be a Derrick Rose team after the Knicks traded for Jalen Brunson? I don't know how much I would give up for him aside from like trying to match salary. Would you want to give up Will Barton for Derrick Rose if you're Washington? I might argue that you don't. But there is a team option on Rose, so he's next year, so he's functionally an expiring contract as well. That is certainly something that they could look at. I thought about, just depending on what Orlando was trying to do, what about Markelle Fultz for this team? It would be like if you took, it's like sort of a worse offensive fit than DeJounte Murray, but with a lot of the same side defensive benefits. That would just be something to look at. Again, I don't love the offensive fit there. Could you just take a flyer on Cameron Payne? He doesn't currently fit into any of your trade exceptions, but again, what does it really cost you that much to get him in the first place, aside from just figuring out how to match salary? So those are names I think that would be worth keeping an eye on. I really did kind of like the idea of Mike Conley here a little bit. I just think when you look at Washington's best matching salary, they're probably all too valuable to include in a Mike Conley trade, knowing that he has the huge guarantee. He's guaranteed this season, and a huge guarantee. It's more than 50% of his contract the following season and his age. And so I think if you're Washington, you'd prefer the flexibility rather than going like, let's say, Will Barton and pick your salary filler from there. I think it is Rui Hachimura in that situation. Do you view Rui Hachimura as salary filler? I have a feeling the Wizards view him slightly higher than that, if not a lot higher than that. Might be a name, though, to keep an eye on if Utah decides to blow it up. They could go for even like maybe even an Alec Burks type if Detroit is looking to move on from him again. Not a point guard, but someone else who could generate their own shot. And so why not just drown your roster in secondary playmakers? I think I've gone long enough on the Wizards, though. I thought it was a good trade for them. I love the Monte Morris fit there, and you still have all these options moving forward. I'm a lot higher on their offseason and what they can do than I think a lot of other people are. So many just view this Bradley Beal exception as them consigning themselves to mediocrity. And I really don't think it's that. Even if you don't love the deal, even if you're disappointed with how he played last season, they're not tethered to any direction right now. Like, this isn't the Lakers with Russell Westbrook and that type of non-option. They have so much flexibility on the rest of their books to make trades right now, to make some impact signings right now that aren't going to hamstring their books because they're going to be for salary cap exceptions. They could wait and sort of straddle this line where it's they wait and see what they have next season. Then they figure out how to use that flexibility. Do they need to ever revisit the Bradley Beal situation over the next year or two? They can do that as well. I think they're not in the best situation, the most enviable position in the NBA, but I even like the Johnny Davis idea here. And maybe that was part of the KCP calculus, by the way, moving him and thinking that that's someone who is going to be able to play an immediate role for you, which I wouldn't, he's 20, he's 6'4". Like, that's just like kind of a similar build there to KCP. But I'm more optimistic about the Wizards, both in the short term and long term, than I think a lot of other people are. And I'm fascinated to see where their offseason heads next. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, please consider throwing us a permanent subscription on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. We really do exhaust ourselves trying to cover the entire NBA. I re-recorded the Southeast Division look ahead by myself because we didn't want to just give you dated information. I ended up going about 10 minutes longer. We were supposed to do 10 to 12 minutes on each team. This was a fascinating trade by the Wizards. Again, rate, review, subscribe to Hardwood Knocks wherever you get your podcast. Check out our Discord. It is in the podcast description and also the YouTube description below. Follow us on the socials, also in the description. Until next time, and like always, I leave you with a shout out to the one, the only, Frank Ntilikina.